A flurry of transfer portal activity on this Friday, but a lot of Missouri fans seem worried about this transfer portal class. Why is that? Pretty simple answer. The thief of joy, comparison.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on the hardwood, Missouri with a real opportunity to get off to a 4-1 start in SEC play, traveling to Baton Rouge against a struggling LSU squad. Going to talk about that ball game a little later in the show. Also, are any of these edge rushers in the portal truly worth the price? Because the price is really getting out of control. I think a lot of teams are probably balking a little bit at some guys who, well, look good on paper, but don't have all that much production so far. Plus, the transfer portal closes tonight, so I got plenty to get to on that topic, of course. Just quickly, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first ticket purchase. And when it comes to this transfer portal class, I think that there are, well, at least some vocal Missouri fans online who are nervous about this class so far. And of course, the portal isn't closed yet. That'll happen tonight at midnight. But even then, by the way, just for some mechanics here, of course, that'll be the deadline for portal entry. There can still be players who are still in the portal who can sign after this deadline. So a signing deadline, no. An entry deadline, yes. But when it comes to, well, I think Missouri fans and their level of panic, I think it's pretty simple. You're comparing this year's class to last year's class. And just take the quarterbacks, for example. Well, I think right now Missouri fans, for the most part, are really optimistic about Austin Simmons. Well, a lot of Missouri fans, including myself, were optimistic about Beau Pribula this time of year as well. So what do we make of that? Let's just say it's a wash at this point, considering Austin is truly an unknown in a Missouri uniform at this point. By the way, Josiah Trotter, I think as soon as he was signed by Missouri, at least I thought, well, here's a guy who's destined for the NFL, and indeed, off he goes after 1 year at Missouri. I think Robert Woodyard Jr., he may not be quite that level, and that's a really high bar what Josiah Trotter set last year. But in terms of guys in the portal, I don't think you could have done any better than the former Auburn linebacker Robert Woodyard Jr. So far a pretty good start in this class. The problem is there are still 4 huge names from last year's Missouri transfer portal class that, quite honestly, I can't come up with a name at this point who is an obvious comparison or replacement. For example, of course, Ahmad Hardy. Now, for one thing, Missouri doesn't need another running back. But what I'm saying is Hardy was a guy that at least I thought as soon as he was signed, I was as big a fan as there was in the country, I think. I was going, this guy could put up Cody Schrader type of numbers and maybe even be in the Heisman conversation if Missouri wins enough ball games. I think that all played out, obviously. And yet, while Missouri doesn't need a running back, do they have that explosive kind of playmaker at the wide receiver position or anywhere else in the portal? Hard to make that case at this point, in my opinion. And same thing with Kevin Coleman Jr., by the way, a guy who had proven to be a really productive, third-team All-SEC, honorable mention at the very least type of player at Mississippi State and previously Louisville and Jackson State as well. You kind of knew what you were getting in Kevin Coleman Jr. I don't know that you can say the same about any of the receivers that Missouri has gotten in the portal so far. I think former Cincinnati Bearcat Caleb Goody, I think he's a pretty great Marquise Johnson one-for-one trade for sure. Maybe even a little better, I would say, a more proven production in 24 and in 25 anyway. Still, I just don't think you can make a comparison to Kevin Coleman. Well, how about Damon Wilson? the erstwhile Missouri Tiger, 1 year with Missouri. Got himself a bag, is looking to secure another one in the market right now. I'll talk a little bit more about Damon here in a little bit, but clearly Missouri is not going to get that level of pass rusher outside of maybe if they close on the Florida State Desir twins. Maybe you could make an argument that Mandrell Desir is that type of player. That doesn't seem very likely at the moment. And then finally, maybe the most overlooked player in the portal this past season, Keegan Trost, or is it Trost? Excuse me. I think it's Trost, but regardless, Keegan was one heck of an addition from Wake Forest. Excuse me. He was just immediately a plug and play guy at right tackle that will not only filled that position but played quite well. He's probably an NFL draft pick this coming off season here. So the thing is, I understand, since I just laid all that out there, those 4 players, Coleman, Hardy, Wilson, and Trost, I just don't see that there's a 1-to-1 replacement for either one of those guys, at least not an obvious one. We'll see what happens this coming season. But I will say this, because Bo Prabula ended up being a disappointment at Missouri, to say the least, if Austin Simmons, the former Ole Miss quarterback, can elevate this Missouri passing game, boy, that sure makes up for a lot of the other potential deficits that the Tigers could have in 26, at least on paper. And while Missouri did add 4 more players today in the portal, well, this flurry of activity kind of sums up again why some Missouri fans are having some consternation. For example, it's been announced that Kenric Lanier II, a former Minnesota Golden Gopher wide receiver, well, in 2025, his numbers are not exactly going to blow you away. 3 catches for 79 yards appeared in 10 games last season for the Gophers. So again, not exactly Kevin Coleman type of sure thing production coming in. So a lot of Missouri fans are going to say, hey, wait a second. I thought Eli Drinkwitz was into, quote, production over potential. Well, as I like to say, context is king, and context is of the utmost importance here when you're talking about that statement. See, Eli Drinkwitz wasn't saying, hey, in every single instance, we're going to take production over potential. Because, of course, price matters, the market matters, et cetera, a bajillion different variables in each and every decision, which is, of course, different than each and every other decision. So what Eli Drinkwitz was talking about there, it was in the wake of, for example, Williams Nwaneri departing the program. Basically, if you want to translate that production over potential quote, which has become a famous rallying cry for some Missouri fans, I suppose. Well, the thing is, he was talking about specifically, hey, I think we're not going to be spending 6 figures and above on high school players anymore. That was basically the message I got from Drinkwitz in that moment. At least very, very high dollar amounts. We're going to put that to guys who have proven potential. That doesn't mean we're not going to take any guys who need development, and maybe guys like, again, Kenric Lanier, who had 3 catches last season but was a former 4-star high school recruit just as recently as 2023. And Missouri, by the way, adds 3 more guys in the portal as well. I'll tell you about those players. And also, anybody who thinks that Damon Wilson was skipping the NFL draft, well, just to get money in college, I got news for you. If Damon were truly a first-round draft pick, he'd be coming back for sure. And speaking of he'd be heading to the NFL. That is for sure. If he were truly a first-round pick, the money just doesn't add up. The money's gotten a lot better, especially for the quarterbacks. But at every other position, believe me, Damon would have went to the NFL if he thought he was a surefire first-day pick there. But, of course, I have more to get to on the portal and specifically on these edge positions. And the portal closes tonight, so just a ton to get to. And, of course, Missouri basketball on the docket on Saturday as well. But I do have to tell you about Gametime, because this time of year, I just love going to basketball games, quite honestly. Get out of the cold weather, have a fun event to go to, and nothing is more fun than Mizzou Arena to me. Next Tuesday, Missouri taking on, an entertaining Georgia team, by the way, and some great seats available. Of course, Missouri will have its own ticket deals, but if you want some really premium seats right now, hey, just $34. You can sit in the 10th row on the premium side at Mizzou Arena. It's so simple to get whatever kind of tickets you want at Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying college basketball tickets and football and everything else with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. And Missouri, while certainly not in the market for an expensive running back, was still in the market for a couple running backs, with Marquise Davis and Brendan Haygood from their freshman class this past season entering the portal. Well, they just got a Montana running back. And in fact, all three players I'm going to talk about here are from the FCS ranks, including Montana running back Vaaimalae Fonoti. I almost did it. Well, and as you can imagine, Mr. Fonoti is not from Montana. No, he's from Hawaii originally, and played behind a standout FCS running back at Montana, by the way. So perhaps there's something there that Missouri likes that maybe the rest of the country hasn't seen. Again, when it comes to Missouri running backs, even if they come from the FCS ranks, hello, Cody Schrader. To me, Missouri has as good an eye for running backs with Curtis Looper and Eli Drinkwitz as anybody in the country. So they're all interesting to me. See Keywan Lacey, who couldn't get on the field very much in 2024 and suddenly was one of the best, most notable running backs in the country. But to me, with Hardy and Jamal Roberts in the fold already on the roster, why not go depth? Why not go with to use a fantasy football term, why not go with a stars and scrubs strategy? In other words, not that the guys that Missouri signed at running back were scrubs, just means they're cheap. And the key is, in fantasy football and indeed in real football as well, is when you sign those stars and those scrubs, you want some of those scrubs to turn into stars. That's how you really get an advantage. But speaking of which, Colin Sorensen, offensive tackle and FCS starter, by the way, at Charleston Southern, has 2 years to play and notably still has a red shirt to use as well, which I would assume he's likely to take in 2026, because at 6'4", 280 pounds, it seems to me he's probably going to need to put on another 20, 25, maybe even 30 pounds to play in the Southeastern Conference. Unless, of course, he blows you away in camp and puts on 10 to 15 pounds of muscle this offseason, that type of thing. He just seems like a guy who, hey, you take a shot on him. Hopefully you develop him this season. Maybe he becomes something in 2027. And by the way, Missouri also adding a second punter in this cycle as well, Tennessee State's Mark Shenouda. And I can't say I'm exactly the guy to go for punter scouting, but there you go, another punter added by Missouri. Hopefully Missouri's new special teams coach in operation will be maybe a little bit better in identifying good punters, especially at the lower level. But I will say this, for as much as Missouri's punting game has been made, a lot has been made of, well, they've been pretty below average in punting. To me, if you're Missouri, get the punts off and it'll be okay. Get better at returning the punts. That's something I'm more worried about, because really replacement level punting at this point in college football is okay. Like, you can get away with being not so great at punting and still have a great team. And by the way, I do think there's a little bit of confusion out there among some fans. For example, with Damon Wilson, I think there are some people who are thinking, gosh, maybe Damon made a bad gamble here trying to get a bunch of money and he just should have went to the NFL draft. Well, I assure you, even if Damon Wilson is asking for, the biggest rumor I've seen is that he wants $3 million this season. I personally don't think he's going to get that. But even if he were to, for example, even if you're the last pick of the first round in 2026 in the NFL, well, you're going to make $2.96 million in your rookie season. And then your total contract guaranteed value is $16 million. I'm sorry, there are no edge rushers who are going to be getting that in college football this offseason. So I can assure you, if Damon was a surefire first-round pick, he would have entered the NFL draft. And I think the confusion comes in because there are players like the Sorensen kid from Cincinnati, the quarterback. Well, sometimes, hey, and Ty Simpson's been offered reportedly $6.5 million from some school, perhaps even Ole Miss, I believe, to take his name out of the draft and come back to school. Carson Beck, kind of a same deal last season. Well, as quarterbacks, the money is so big, yes, the calculation can change a little bit for one season, especially when, as a quarterback versus edge rusher or running back or basically any other position, that 1 year of reps that you can have as a quarterback at a high level of college is so valuable too for your future value potentially. And again, quarterbacks make so much more money than everybody else, even the mediocre starters in the NFL. It's kind of insane. So for a quarterback, it's a different calculation. But for every other position, I can assure you, if those guys are first rounders, they're entering the draft. And a good example, well, somebody like Luther Burden III last season, who probably thought he was a first rounder, ends up getting picked early in the second round anyway. I don't think anybody would say he made a mistake leaving, though, going to the NFL draft. And by the way, I'll definitely be rooting for Luther and the Bears this weekend. So on that edge position, by the way, Missouri certainly, with the expanded rosters that have come this offseason cycle, for all intents and purposes, Missouri has all the positions it could ever need. But the question is, how much money is there for Missouri to spend? And how many of those guys, especially at the edge position, for example, your defensive ends, your pass rushers, how many of those guys are actually worth the big money that they're asking for? Because, for example, from Florida State, the Desir twins have entered the portal. Well, they want millions of dollars combined. $2 million a piece, probably, something like that. Certainly at least $2 million total. I'd say that's on the very, very conservative lower end. Well, combined last season, those two guys had 7.5 sacks. Mandrell Desir had 6.5, and his brother Daryl had 1. Is that worth millions and millions of dollars? To me, there isn't anybody out there like Damon Wilson last season, except, well, of course, Damon Wilson himself, or even somebody like Nick Scourton in the previous cycle, who was with Purdue, the Big Ten's sack leader, who ended up at Texas A&M. But certainly Missouri kicked the tires and pursued him very hard. But I just don't know that there's anybody worth that price in this market. Maybe because of the lack of supply, they end up getting that price. But again, I don't know if that's worth it to Missouri or not. Is there another position on the roster where you could spend that money? These are the type of questions that Eli Drinkwitz continually has to ask himself. And the vibes have really picked up for Missouri basketball recently. Of course, that happens when you start 3-1 or sitting at the top of the conference. And I got to say, this game in Baton Rouge on Saturday, this is one that Missouri really can't afford to lose. There just aren't that many easy ones on the road in the SEC. Not that LSU is going to be easy. I just think this is an opportunity that Missouri cannot afford to pass up. So you know what? I want to talk about this game coming up right after these quick words. So while LSU got off to, I would say, a pretty good start in non-conference play, well, it's been a brutal start to SEC play for the Bayou Bengals. And there's really a pretty simple answer for that. Dayton Thomas, a transfer from UNLV, well, the last 4 games, which has been the start of the SEC season for LSU, Thomas has sat out all 4 of those games, and it's just really taken a toll on Matt McMahon's squad. And by the way, my colleague Chris Marler, who's been a guest here over at Locked On Gamecocks, he also lives in Baton Rouge and covers LSU for LouisianaSports.net as well. He says, quote, LSU is just a shell of a team without Dayton Thomas. Per McMahon, by the way, he probably won't play against Missouri because he, quote, can't make any cuts or jumps still, end quote. McMinnon is really fun to watch and great from deep, and Nwoku, can take over sometimes inside. Similar to South Carolina, they upped their spend this year, but it still ranks in the bottom 25% of the SEC in basketball. That is clearly translating into what's happening on the court. So, in other words, doesn't seem like Matt McMahon quite has the horses to hang, at least without Dayton Thomas, again, formerly of UNLV. His first couple seasons was really having a great start to his junior campaign for LSU. So the thing is, again, Missouri probably going to be favored in tomorrow's game, I'd say by 3-4 points, something like that if I had to take a guess. I'm not going to be betting on that because it's a road game in the SEC. But if you're Missouri and you can pull this one off against a struggling LSU team who's desperate for a win here, get to 4-1, man, what a huge start that would be for Dennis Gates and his squad, and would obviously give them a little bit of margin for error. And by the way, I did see that Stephen Pearl was apparently... Well, I didn't notice this, but apparently some people thought that Stephen Pearl at the end of the Auburn game was visibly annoyed that Jaden Stone dunked a basketball with the shot clock off at the end of the game. I'll be honest, I didn't even notice that play, and I don't even think that Jaden Stone noticed it either. I think he just ended up with a steal. The ball was in his hands, and he just thought, oh, got to go score. It'd be one thing if Missouri rolls the ball out without the shot clock on, and then they decide to run a play or something like that. I could see why that would annoy him, but my goodness, Stephen Pearl, you got more things to worry about than that. But speaking of Jaden Stone, by the way, I'll say this, my father was early money on loving Jaden Stone, and I loved him too. I loved how he looked in our non-conference play, but since he had that hand injury, missed the Kansas game, missed the Illinois game, for example, I just wanted to see it against better competition. Well, so far here, 4 games into SEC play, Jaden Stone looks like a bona fide all-SEC type of player. Now, I can't compare him to... I haven't seen enough SEC basketball to compare him to the rest of the 15 players in the league and all of their guards. But I'm just telling you, the level that he's playing right now, his combination of ball handling, of scoring, it's incredibly valuable and something that obviously is making a massive difference for Missouri right now. And shout out to Trent Pierce, too, who I thought played probably his best game as a Tiger against Auburn as well. If he continues to play like that, well, with Stone playing well, too, of course, Mark Mitchell's an outstanding SEC player. Missouri's got a chance. They really do. And speaking of having a chance, shout out to Kelly Harper getting her first SEC win with Missouri, by the way, as well. You know, the thing is, even though she didn't directly follow Pat Summitt, as one of her former players, too, I mean, you might as well have been the second coach after Nick Saban. That's basically the level of expectations here. And my take with Kelly Harper the whole time has been pretty simple. I mean, she's been coaching literally since she stopped playing college basketball, and she got her first head job all the way back in 2004. So, I mean, she's got massive amounts of experience despite the fact that she's still young. She's still right in the prime of her coaching life, in my opinion. So, to me, she's already went through the disappointment at Tennessee. She went through the COVID period. And she's made good money, by the way, and yet she immediately steps back into the fray with Missouri. wasn't turned off by this new NIL transfer portal world. Nope, she's right back in it. What does that tell me? That tells me that Kelly Harper is not only a fierce competitor, but what I like about the hire for Missouri too, she's experienced enough that she knows a heck of a lot and has learned a heck of a lot over this time period, and has had to have learned a lot just over this transfer portal and NIL period. But she's also young enough that she's in the prime of her life, and if it works out at Missouri, heck, she can be around here for easily 20 years or something like that. I think she's in a great spot here. I think it's a good marriage between Missouri and Kelly Harper, and clearly I think Missouri's women's basketball recruiting has already taken a step up. So I'm encouraged. A good hire by Missouri. Let's see what happens in year two. I know year one is going to be a challenge. Heck, maybe they can pull it together, pull off a few more victories, but a little bit of patience for Kelly Harper and the women's basketball team, because frankly, the history of Missouri women's basketball, outside of, again, the Cunningham-Porter era, not a whole lot to write home about. So let's have some realistic expectations, a little bit of patience, and yes, a little bit of grace as well. And hey, thanks for joining me here as always on Locked On Mizzou. And if you get sick of the ads, by the way, well, there's a solution for you. The Everydayer Club. It's $5 a month or $50 a year. Check it out at lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. It's the best way to get in direct contact with me as well via our Discord server. So check it all out. Click on the link in the description of today's podcast. And until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.